This is the last in our first year of ZoomMuse Poems for Peace, a series of 10 monthly readings, and it features a particularly appropriate poet, Claudia Castro Luna, a former poet laureate of the state of Washington. Her new book, Cipota Under the Moon, is her first foray into the realm of personal mythology as a war refugee, an immigrant to the United States, where she's created an impressive body of work. The new book continues to feature her mastery of language and imagery and is especially potent for those for whom anti-war poetry is limited. These are genuine poems for peace, pointing out the lingering effects of war on the physiology of Doña Elvira in the poem Meditation on the Color Purple, how gang members extort those wishing to pay respects in a cemetery in the way of peace, and how it had been custom in her native El Salvador to use a parting gesture, "May God grant you a good day." With wars happening at this time everywhere we look, as big as Russia invading Ukraine and as little as the hate in a typical US-American automobile traffic experience, Claudia Castro Luna is truly a poet of this moment, and it's a true pleasure to present her today. Claudia, que Dios te conceda una buena lectura de poesía, mi hermana.
Oh, gracias, Paul. Muchas gracias. I have to take a moment. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us today from the various places where you are. I appreciate that immensely. And to ZoomMuse Poets for Peace, Poems for Peace, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be the closing poet for this season's, what is that for the calendar, right? For what you have presented this year. And I agree with Paul that it's lovely to think that we get to take a break in July and August to replenish and refill ourselves, hopefully with a little sunshine for those of us who don't get much of it. Paul, thank you for that very acute and astute analysis of the book. This is an anti-war book, essentially. And it's one that really focuses on the experience of children and the effects of violence, state violence of its various kinds on children. Because I was witness to a war in El Salvador as a very young teenager, and my sister was a child. And to this day, there isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't feel the aftermath of the violence we endured. And just as you said, Paul, I think so much of what we're seeing unfolding in Ukraine, but certainly in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Palestine, these, this damage, right? This lingering damage persists. And as I was writing these poems, I kept on thinking that we don't have the perspective of children as much as we should have. And so the poems I've selected today, I mean, that's one part of the book, this focus on a child's experience. So today I wanted to focus on that and read several poems where the focus is on kids. And the book is divided in 4 parts. The first part starting in El Salvador, and this is the first, Paul, again, you are right, that this is really my first effort at telling of the war in El Salvador. My poetry really hasn't focused much on my personal experience. So this is the first time where I'm doing that, and the opening of the book is totally that. So the first poem in the book is called Agua de Beber, and I'll begin with that. Agua de Beber. Once there was a girl who lived in a country called Fear. There her fingers cracked and split into sharp mouths that scream what she could not scream. Sometimes her hands itched and she scratched them viciously. With the scratching, her pores swelled. At peak moments, they burst, releasing the liquid within. The girl feared many things, but death most of all, not her own, but that of her parents, through whom she saw and valued the world. That little girl is still around. She lives inside me, sneaking pistachio ice cream whenever she can. Now, when my hands begin to crack and split, I panic and recoil from the pain this causes and from the pain they caused the little girl. Long ago, my hands learned to cry in my stead. They carved deltas at the tips of my fingers that took me to ocean. Oh, how deep, how vast the great water, how it sloshes inside my belly. Oh, how beautiful the world to which I belong. So that's the opening of the poem. This next one is titled Hija de los Días. My 14th birthday happened in a November lost to a brackish year. Newspaper headlines from the first 16s of that month listed the following. On the second day, 10 bodies of unidentified young men were found ditched on the road to Apulo. 2 days later, a man was gunned down and killed in his car in northern San Salvador. The following day, a man succumbed when his furniture store was attacked. On the 7th, in the city of Santa Ana, a 13-year-old boy and 4 adults were attacked and killed. On the 15th, a union leader died of gunshot wounds. The next day, a colonel, his wife, and his children, 11 and 15, were carbonized when incendiary bombs exploded in their house. Peck days and plucked of hope. My parents did not sing my birthday. They must have felt war's vertigo, the gathering of ashes inside people and things. These days, I pull weeds in my garden and just as soon new ones leaf back up. Is that resilience? Happy birthday, Papa. Happy birthday, Mama. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you. I was a few months after I turned 14, actually 2 months after I turned 14. My birthday is in November, and my family arrived in the United States in January. And we arrived in Florida, as I know the heat and the humidity of Florida very well, because that's where I lived for a while. And I remember it was the kindness of Cuban Americans, and who took care of us and showed up with food and clothing. Yeah, it was I did not know then their story, but certainly they showed up for us when we arrived in Florida. This one's titled, This is Not a Poem. Guerra doesn't go away when the bullets stop, when the grenades go silent, when helicopter blades no longer kick up the dust of innocence or presidential lies. There is no periphery to guerra. I'll say a giant cloaca, propelling its stench on the ground, in the sky, underwater, subcutaneously, clouding dreams, clogging guts, silencing tongues. Guerra does not know of lazy Sunday mornings or afternoon coffee breaks. It knows fear and death. I highly don't recommend it. And there is a poet in El Salvador. So when I was growing up in El Salvador, poetry was very much part of the curriculum in our schools. And we memorized poems and recited them. Alfredo Espino is a famous Salvadoran writer. a romantic. So a lot of the poems are poems of place, singing to sugarcane fields. For instance, there's a famous poem where he's on a hill overlooking a sugarcane plantation, a sugarcane field, and watching the flowers of the sugarcane, which are this, these strings of fluffy feathers swaying in the wind. And he compares that in his poem to the ocean. So this is for Alfredo Espino. Of course, Alfredo Espino does not talk about the horrible conditions of the people who harvest sugarcane. There's none of that mentioned there. So for Alfredo Espino, if I had wings this morning, if I had wings, soar to the blue with frank scissors, cut enough sky, fashion a cape, place it on my shoulders, become a kind of Shiro who speaks with the eloquence of wind, the fairness of light, the truth of children's eyes, to excise once and for all the muck soiling men's hearts. And this next poem is titled Angelitos. And I'll read maybe 3 more poems after this, and then we could stop. And I welcome questions. I always try to answer questions with more poems, if that's possible. So I could read a few more poems in the, as we move along. Angelitos, of course, means little angels. Of all humans, dead children alone possess the innocence and grace to be granted unquestioned and immediate entry into heaven. Their bodies, tenderly clothed in milk and lace, are laid to rest in white coffins lined in pearly satin. Whenever possible, ruffles of white crepe paper adorn the outside of their funeral boxes. Whenever possible, a circlet of ivory flowers crowns the girls. Sometimes a white band with a paper cross encircles a boy's head. These angelitos are the lucky ones, their dead bodies lovingly tended, their souls exalted. Won't you join me, dear reader, in soliciting heaven's entry for the unlucky boys and girls massacred alongside their parents in remote villages all over El Salvador, who, while no longer in possession of their bodies, having fattened maggots long ago, are nonetheless still in possession of souls deserving a long-delayed entry into paradise. Help me intercede for those who still have limbs, but whose spirits have withered from watching others ripped apart by machine guns and machetes, from watching hope and luck rescue them, and for those whose meager bodies quiver under mylar blankets in detention cages at the US-Mexico border, for they have cried and suffered 1,000 times over for no other reason than. Dead and alive, we die every day a little more. Just ask the trees outside your window. In fact, as we gather a new breath, part of us is already underground, tucked in graves among the remains of our dear someones who took with them the piece of us only they knew, as we retain the piece of them only we knew. And I will read, I'll read the closing poem in the book. Oh, hold on. I'll read 2 more poems. This one is called Cipota Bajo la Luna, which is the poem. The book is titled after this poem. The book is in English, Cipota Under the Moon. This poem is titled Cipota Bajo la Luna, and Cipota is a Salvadoran word for girl. It's a very, very Salvadoran word. Nobody says niña. Nobody says girl in El Salvador. We say cipota or cipote. So this is called Cipota Bajo la Luna. She appeared from behind one of the parked cars, her smile defying night's charcoal light. She was lithe and glowing as if she had plucked and eaten a chunk of moon. She could not have been more than 6 years old. Una cipota earning her keep outside a well-to-do restaurant in San Salvador, counting on mollified patrons and her startling presence to conciliate them to their Christian values. Por favor, she said, extending a hand in our direction. A coin rested at the heart of it, the truth and she showing us the way. Just then, another hand encircled mine. She watched us walk away in our regalia and into the order of things. Her arm at her side, her hand no richer, and my reflection in the obsidian mirror of her eyes. So now I will read the closing poem of this book, which is titled, Leave the Gate Open on Your Way Out. On a quiet street, a bloom-laden rosebush leans into the sidewalk. Its orange flowers swirl and pulse, buds shoot up to meet the sun, which in time will ripen their promises. On the same bush, next to fragrance and splendor, in quiet hush, invalid roses drop fading petals one by one. At the end of the street stands a hospital. It houses a morgue and a maternity ward. My own 3 children were born within its walls. To give birth is a revolution. Leave the gate open on your way out, better for the angels and the devil to come and go. The path to happiness is by way of pain and sorrow. That is something my abuela could have said. On the quiet street, many pass by the rosebush, exuberant or crestfallen. The shrub stands ready to share loss and joy, but only with those who stop to smell its roses. Thank you.
Too short, Claudia.
Well, I could read more. Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the, I do want others to chime in. I do not want to dominate this, but there's one thing that's really kind of, it as a U.S. American, the funding for the wars in Central America came, and the training for the School of the Americas, and you know, supported by, you know, if we could all say these are Ronald Reagan's wars, it would be so much easier. But they're Jimmy Carter's wars and Ronald Reagan's wars. And I can't help but think that we thought as Americans, and I didn't think that, but we thought, well, this is over there. This is them. This is the other that this is happening to. And you have these experiences, and now these experiences of children being terrorized by gunfire and by bullets happening in schools in this country, which is just a horrific development, but it seems somewhat karmic. And you left that, came to this country, was treated, you know, in such a way that it was beautiful. So you must have some rather mixed emotions about the fact that it's the US in large part responsible for the wars in your native country. And yet you live in this country pretty much away from that and have had a good life here.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's a neither here nor there. And I've written elsewhere about that realization, the realization that wars forced my family to seek life. And we came here, and although there were difficult times, you know, we made a new life, right? And I, as a girl and as a woman, I've had access to education in a way that I could not have had in El Salvador, education and other opportunities that I could not have had. So I'm aware of that. That was a gain, but the gain doesn't preclude, does not take away the loss, the enormous loss of family and belonging. I mean, you learn to belong, but there is an enormous hole there that didn't have to be, right? I mean, we didn't have to leave. And in fact, we didn't want to leave. I don't think anybody wants to leave. The people who are walking now across Mexico with their children, unbelievable. They don't want to leave. And so, but you do. I mean, and you know, the other part of that is we escape, as that poem about my birthday shows, and that is a research on my part of what transpired on those first half of that month. That is fact. Those horrible list of killings that I share in that poem. But we come here and find equally devastating violence in places where we lived, and you know, now with the school shootings, it's unbelievable. I actually have a poem to that, if I may.
Vamos a la escuela.
Vamos a la escuela is a poem about El Salvador and the violence there. What page is that, Paul?
That's on page 20, and I wrote at the bottom of this, now US kids have this experience.
Yes. And then there's, so I will read, I want to read that, and I'll read a poem about schools here. Okay, so I'll read the poem on page 20, which is Vamos a la escuela, let's go to school. And this is my sister and myself going to school. We walked to school clean as clouds in our starched white uniforms through the campus of the National University. The shortcut took us past buildings tagged with revolutionary slogans, banners draped over gun-shattered windows, walls pockmarked with bullet holes. These daily walks were instructive. Desecrated buildings served double time as lesson and chalkboard. Our vocabulary expanded. Ametrallado, quebrado, baleado, tiroteado, balaceado, pistoleado, acribillado. As we learned that there was more than one way to say riddled with bullets. People died that way. So all those words in Spanish that are mentioned are ways of, they're synonyms of somebody who's been riddled with bullets. And not only were people riddled with bullets, buildings too, right? So that was my experience walking to school. We lived on one end of the university, and the shortest, fastest way to school was to cut through it. And on the other side was our little school, and our uniforms were white. So we wore this starched white uniforms with buttons down the middle with a little belt and socks, white socks up to our knees and black shoes. And that's how we went to school. And this really, you know, like little flags of peace, essentially, kids going to school. And we had to pass through this desecrated landscape. Not to mention that at any moment, another fight could break out and we would have been caught in that crossfire. That was part of our walking to school. So I wrote a poem called Civitas later in the book, where I explored the violence in this country, because we escape violence only to find more violence. So this is about now my children. Civitas, a mass shooting on the 300 block of Broadway. The encounter left 4 wounded and 2 dead to cap a crime-riddled weekend. Last week, a bullet intended for a young father found instead the infant son he cradled in his arms. My own children came home from school with a special note from the principal explaining that a beloved teacher was one of the dead. The children were told directly that he was shot and died. The school's blue ribbon did not protect him. Good rankings and excellent test scores will not bring him back. Dead is dead, war is war. Diligent death escorts all children away from their gardens. At school, children were told no one knows who killed him, but I know who. It's not that hard. Things add up on our feet, rain, in our pockets, tired refrains, in our hands, stains, and at the ballot box, flames. Yeah, so that is the linking in my mind of this, violence that happens. Those children, my own children, created banners against guns and marched around the block. These are elementary school children, and marched around the block carrying these banners with the name of their teacher and asking for, bans on guns. And that was, my oldest, who was one of the kids who made banners, was then, I believe, in 3rd grade, and now she's going into her junior year in college.
Ursula had a wonderful question in the chat. I'm gonna read it. You read and write such powerful poems. Your calm, quiet manner, your gentle, calm images juxtaposed with the stark, horrific images of violence and terror. I wonder how it was for you emotionally to unearth these memories again to write these poems.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Ursula. I think it took me so long to write these poems. I mean, I've written about the Columbia River. I've written, many different things. And just now I'm getting around to these stories, partly because they are so difficult. I've been writing alongside this book, a memoir about my family's experience of leaving El Salvador and my own living with PTSD and how that's been for me. And it's, I've ended up in the hospital twice writing that memoir, just from, I didn't know the first time it happened, but I understand it now, just from working so hard to construct the spaces on the page, invariably takes me back to the moment there. And, maybe I could feel the feelings now in a way that I didn't when I was younger. And so I've ended up in the emergency room thinking that I was having a heart attack. And in fact, I wasn't having a heart attack. I was just writing. I was writing these poems and these stories. Yeah. So it hasn't been easy. It's not easy to read them either, because you enact as you're reading, right? Just as you're listening to this, it's hard to hear them too. I recognize that. The book is very much confronting these memories and writing about them, and at the same time, not losing sight of the humanity and resilience of people, of my family, of my parents, of myself. And God, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, but also about just the beauty of being alive, right? And what you do when you're up against these memories. I don't think that you have time to think what you do when you're in the middle of it, but some of us are granted time to think back upon it and consider things. And so yeah, and to look at that, like that poem about my 14th birthday ends with resilience, because I did not know what is resilience. People talk about it, but I think my parents' life and my own are an example of that resilience. God, Ursula, you've touched my heart, because I'm getting really choked up, and I normally don't. I've read these poems before, not gone to this space of, feeling the emotional impact. So thank you for that.
I wanted to say, I was just going to use that word resilience for what I've been experiencing in the beauty of your work, that within the images of terror, they're juxtaposed with incredible beauty and mostly found in nature. And I'm also finding your work healing at the same time. And I don't know if this is more just a comment or perhaps there's a question embedded in there is how you do it, or perhaps it simply just emerges as a result of who you are. I'm not sure, but I just wanted to at least comment on that. The juxtaposition is not just it's beyond the usual, and it seems to work. It seems to be so beautifully interwoven with everything else. And even just when you were speaking now of as a schoolgirl walking in your little white uniform, these images of pure innocence walking through what could become a battlefield at any moment. I hope you put that into a poem. It's just shocking and wakes us up and horrifies us, and then moves us on into a sense of redemption at the same time. It's phenomenal. So
yeah, there has to be a space. I thank you for that comment. I think that if we shy away from the horror, and I've given a lot of thought about the way in which we as writers approach, I live in this, I write about war, so how we approach the horrors of war, and we have to face it. We have to feel that. We have to feel the dread of it, the horrific nature of it. And then we have to find the other side of it in order to do something about it, because otherwise we can't. We're immobilized. I think we are immobilized by that. The imagery of the plants, I think, my father is a huge gardener. He always was. I think people, a house in El Salvador isn't a house if it doesn't have a tree. So people plant trees, and people plant trees not like people plant trees here, because here I'm a gardener. This year has been terrible, but I got beets and chard growing. I have sweet peas out in the garden, and I have a more like a aesthetic garden as well, and I give it thought. I think, what are my beds going to look like as you're coming into my house? I want low growing plants, in the front, and I've read too many gardening books, right? But people over there, they just put in trees wherever. It's like, I want a mango tree. Let's put a mango tree. Let's put this tree, and so the yards are full of trees. But there is the point. It's a different way of engaging with nature. It's you want the tree, you want the shade it gives, you want the fruit of it. But I don't know that aesthetic considerations like the ones we have here even come into. It's just different, So I want to read you, I think, the first poem I wrote. This is the first poem. It's in this book it was published before, but it's really the first poem of mine that ever got published. It's titled My Father's Garden. And my dad lived in the US for 20 years, 20 very difficult, maybe it's even fair to say miserable years. My parents were teachers in El Salvador, and my father here could not find work other than with his body. And that was really hard. He's a person who loves literature, is a big reader, and there was never space to be that person in this country. So he went back and he became a teacher. He finished his teaching career, and I went and visited him, and he, of course, had started a new garden. So this is my title, My Father's Garden. My father's garden bears no resemblance to the orderly paradises found in glossy magazines. There are no tidy borders to admire, no coordinating color palettes. Here, the eye is overtaken by a mass of unapologetic green, olive green, forest green, lemon green, green, green. and speckle among the verdure, calling attention to the resplendent selves are flowers in many hues and shapes. The mallows, my father's favorites, offer blooms as big as birds' nests. Petals glisten in midday sun, stretch wide and far. There's little modesty in their display. There's no coyness in this garden, only abundance and overflow. Zinnias grow by the dozen, roses burst, yellow, salmon, red, bougainvilleas, trumpet flowers, a pulsing profusion planted all with trembling hands. 20 years in exile is a long time to contemplate. Each new leaf, a coming to terms with lost ideals, each new flower, a testament to fallen friends, each new seedling, a last salute to persecutions of the heart. My father's garden, a nascent Eden, a rooting back to his native land. So I wrote this poem, and my then teacher, I was taking poetry classes at the local community college, and my teacher wrote in the margins, he asked me if I would read this poem at the monthly open mic at the school. And B, he said how much he appreciated the redemptive nature of the garden in this poem. And you know that I wrote the poem and I didn't think about the redemptive nature of the garden. I was just writing about my dad's life. But when he said that, I thought, yes, of course, that's exactly what it is. How nature is able to help us get on the other side of things and look back from that side and have a certain distance and reflection and find some peace, you know. And that to me is happens all the time. And I learned that from my dad. You know, if I'm having a terrible day, a good half hour of weeding does a lot for me to get to the other side of things, you know. I mean, I think that's why weeding shows up in the garden. I love weeds and I love weeding. It's very, it's transformative.
Well, Claudia, your beautiful soul and beautiful work is really made this a wonderful way to end the first year of ZoomMuse Poems for Peace. It also became very clear to me that writing true poems of peace that ask us to look at the horrors of war is asking more of the reader or the listener than anti-war poems, where we can say those people are wrong and we can get all this righteous indignation, but it's a very superficial feeling. And you've got us down into the depths of what it means to be a human being. And I pray that your own PTSD, which you might want to call PTSI, consider it an injury rather than a disorder, because you can overcome it through nature, through the garden and procedures. I wish you the best in overcoming that. And it's very clear to me that you will, because you have a very strong spirit. The book is filled with duende, and I'm really humbled and honored that you came to read to our ZoomMuse Poems for Peace series. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for having me, Paul. Thank you for inviting me and making space for me and my word and my experience as well. Thank you.
I know you're on a time crunch here, so I'll take the liberty to wrap it up, to thank you all for attending, especially those who came to numerous readings. Halima Polk, I'm looking at you. I'm really grateful to work with Adelia McWilliam and Andrew Hall. They are two quality human beings, and working with them is a real joy. And we will reconvene in September. I do want to point out that I'm coming, as is Claudia, from the ancestral homeland of the Duwamish people and other coastal Salish tribes here in Seattle, to whom we owe a great debt and to whom we have the responsibility to live here sustainably as a way of honoring their practice for millennia before settlers got here. So thank you, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and other local tribes. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, the ZoomMuse Poems for Peace team, and thank you all for attending. Yeah, Andrew, you may wrap it up, Andrew.
What a privilege to hear you read, Claudia, and hear you explain and talk about the personal impact of your poetry, your process. You've really enriched us all today, so thank you so much. And other than that, do you want to say anything, Adelia?
Oh yeah, I was just typing my gratitude, just saying I feel very moved and touched, and just so much thanks for giving us your time today, Claudia. I really appreciate it. It's just a beautiful way for us to, as Paul said, to end the season is to have your reading. And I'm also happy to know that this reading will be posted and hopefully others will be able to listen.
Have a
Bye,
great day,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you again.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pam.